You know, when we think about disasters, we usually see them as these isolated, terrible moments. But what if I told you that one state's worst tragedies actually became the blueprint for how all of America protects itself? Well, that's exactly the story of Texas. A series of massive disasters there literally changed the entire nation.
And that's really the key thing to get here. These events we're going to dive into, they weren't just local news. No way. These were painful, incredibly high-stakes turning points. They forced the entire country to rethink, well, pretty much everything, from how we build our cities and handle industrial safety to even the basics of how we predict the weather. So our journey is going to hit three really specific moments in time. We're going to start way back at the turn of the 20th century with a storm that, and I mean this literally, wiped a city clean off the map. Then we'll jump ahead to the post-war industrial boom and a truly deadly explosion. And we'll wrap it all up in our own era with a flood on a scale that's just, it's hard to even imagine. All right, let's start with our first one, Galveston 1900. Now, to really grasp how huge this disaster was, you have to picture what Galveston was like back then. This wasn't just some sleepy little coastal town. Oh no, it was the jewel of the Gulf Coast, a booming, incredibly prosperous port city. Everyone thought its future was just limitless. In fact, people actually called it the New York of the South. Think about that for a second. That nickname really tells you the whole story, doesn't it? This was a major hub for commerce and money, and it was on track to become one of the most important cities in the entire country. And it's that incredible potential that makes what happened next so absolutely shocking.
Then, on September 8th, 1900, that entire future just vanished. A monster of a storm, a Category 4 hurricane, slammed right into the island. And you have to remember, this was an age before satellites, before Doppler radar, before any kind of real forecasting. The city was just a sitting duck. The storm surge, the winds, it was a force of nature that was completely beyond anything they could have prepared for or even understood.
The result was a death toll that is still just staggering to think about. We're talking somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people killed. That was a huge chunk of the city's entire population. And get this, to this day, it is still the single deadliest natural disaster in all of U.S. history. Period.
But here's the thing. Out of that almost unimaginable tragedy came transformation. The problem couldn't have been clearer. The city was completely defenseless. So the national solution, born directly from Galveston's ruins, was incredible. It included building a massive seawall, truly an engineering marvel for its time, and inventing a whole new, more efficient style of city government to handle the rebuild. And crucially, it lit a fire under the whole country to get way, way better at forecasting the weather.
Okay, let's fast forward a few decades to 1947. We're now in the post-World War II industrial boom. It was this amazing time of progress, right? But it also came with brand new man-made dangers. And our next disaster, well, it didn't come from the sky. It came from a highly volatile chemical sitting quietly in the hull of a ship in a place called Texas City.
The culprit here was something called ammonium nitrate. Now, it's a super common chemical, a key ingredient in fertilizer. You know, the stuff that's vital for growing food for the world. But, and this is a big but, if you get the conditions just wrong, it is catastrophically explosive. And what happened next was just a terrifying, unstoppable chain reaction. It started with a small fire on a ship that was packed with the stuff. When that ship exploded, the blast was so massive it actually set off a second ship loaded with the same chemical. That explosion in turn ignited all the nearby chemical plants and oil refineries. I mean, it was a full-blown industrial apocalypse.
The official death toll was almost 600 people, with thousands and thousands more injured. At the time, it was the single largest industrial accident in American history. It was a horrifying wake-up call to the new dangers we were creating in the chemical age.
And again, this wasn't just a Texas story. The Texas City disaster is the direct reason we have a complete nationwide system of regulations for handling hazardous materials in our ports. Think about that. So many of the safety standards that protect workers and communities today were written in the literal ashes of that fire. All right, that brings us right into our modern era, to 2017, and a storm that completely redefined what we even thought was possible when it comes to flooding. Hurricane Harvey, it wasn't really about the wind, it was all about the sheer, almost biblical amount of water that it just dumped on southeast Texas.
This scale of Harvey is just, it's mind-boggling. So let's just hit the numbers real quick. First, the rain. Some places got over 60 inches.
That's 5 feet of rain falling from the sky. And all that water, it flooded more than 100,000 homes, creating this massive humanitarian crisis.
The final price tag for all that destruction? A jaw-dropping $125 billion. That puts it right up there with Hurricane Katrina as one of the costliest disasters ever in the U.S.
So you can imagine the sheer scale of Harvey's flooding just completely overwhelmed the official first responders. And that really brought up a huge question for the whole country. When the systems you count on are literally underwater, who steps up? Who comes to the rescue?
And the answer, it turns out, was everybody else. These spontaneous groups of regular citizens with their own boats, you've probably heard of them, the Cajun Navy, they went out and rescued thousands of people. But Harvey also forced us to look at some really hard truths. It just laid bare how much more vulnerable low-income neighborhoods were, and it kicked off these urgent national debates about city planning and what kind of infrastructure we actually need for a changing climate.
Okay, so we've looked at these 3 monumental events: a hurricane, an explosion, and a flood. So what's the takeaway? What are the big lessons that were forged in all that fire and water?
You know, when you lay it all out, the lessons are crystal clear. Galveston was all about engineering and being prepared. Texas City, that sparked a revolution in industrial safety. And Harvey showed us the incredible power of community, while also making us face tough questions about our infrastructure. Each one of these disasters taught the nation a unique and absolutely essential lesson.
So in the end, what this really shows is that even though these disasters happened in Texas, their impact, their lessons, they belong to the entire nation. Time and time again, the state's painful story of survival and rebuilding has become America's own roadmap for resilience.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty critical question. All these lessons from Galveston, from Texas City, from Harvey, they form a blueprint, right? A guide for how to respond, adapt, and rebuild when catastrophe strikes. So the real question for all of us is this: in an age with new and growing threats, are we still prepared to actually read that blueprint?